Green, this is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to talk about a subject near and dear to my white male heart. Imperialism. So here at Crash Course, we occasionally try to point out that the U.S., much as we hate to admit it, is actually part of a larger world. Mr. Green, you mean like Alaska? No, me from the past. For reasons that you will understand after your trip there before your senior year of college, I do not acknowledge the existence of Canada's tail. No, I'm referring to all of the green parts of not America, and the period in the 19th century when we thought maybe we could make all those green parts like America, but, you know, without rights and stuff. So the late 19th and early 20th centuries were a period of expansion and colonization in Asia and Africa, mostly by European powers. As you'll know if you watch Crash Course World History, imperialism has a long history pretty much everywhere. So this round of empire building is sometimes called, rather confusingly, new imperialism. Because the US acquired territory beyond its continental boundaries in this period, it's relatively easy to fit American history into this world history paradigm. But there's also an argument that the United States has always from very early on, the European settlers who became Americans were intent on pushing westward and conquering territory. The obvious victims of this expansion/imperialism were the Native Americans, but we can also include the Mexicans who lost their sovereignty after 1848. And if that doesn't sound like an empire to you, allow me to draw your attention to the Russian Empire. Russians were taking control of territory in Central Asia and Siberia and either absorbing or displacing the native people who lived there, which was the exact same thing that we were doing. The empires of the late 19th and early 20th centuries were different because they were colonial in their own special way. Like, Europeans and Americans would rule other places, but they wouldn't settle them and more or less completely displace the native people there. Well, except for you, Australia and New Zealand. American historians used to try to excuse America's acquisitions of a territorial empire as something of an embarrassing mistake, but that's misleading because one of the primary causes of the phenomenon of American imperialism was economics. We needed places to sell our amazing new products. And at the time, China actually had all of the customers because apparently it was opposite day. It's also not an accident that the US began pursuing imperialism in earnest during the 1890s, as this was in many ways a decade of crisis in America. The influx of immigrants and the crowded cities added to anxiety and concern over America's future, and then to cap it all off in 1893, a panic caused by the failure of a British bank led the US into a horrible economic depression. A Great Depression, but not the Great Depression. It did, however, feature 15,000 business failures and 17% unemployment, so take that, 2008. According to American diplomatic historian George Herring, imperialism was just what the doctor ordered to help America get out of its depression. Other historians, notably Kristen Hoganson, imply that America embarked on imperial adventures partly so that American men could prove to themselves how manly they were, you know, by joining the Navy and setting sail for distant waters. In 1890, Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan published The Influence of Sea Power Upon History and argued that to be a great power, like Great Britain, the US needed to control the seas and dominate international commerce. Tied into this push to become a maritime power was the obsession with building a canal through Central America, and eventually the US decided that it should be built in Panama because, you know, how else are we going to get malaria? In order to protect this canal, we would need a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. Sorry, I just wanted to get the palindrome in there somewhere. No, we would actually need much more than a man and a plan. We would need ships, and in order to have a functioning two-ocean navy, we would need colonies. Why? Because the steamships at the time were powered by coal, and in order to refuel, they needed coal depots. I mean, I suppose we could have, like, rented harbor space, but why rent when you can conquer? Also, nationalism and the accompanying pride in one's country was a worldwide phenomenon to which the US was not immune. I mean, it's no accident that the 1890s saw Americans begin to recite the Pledge of Allegiance and celebrate Flag Day. And what better way to instill national pride than by flying the stars and stripes over Guam. So pre-Civil War attempts to expand beyond what we now know as the continental United States included our efforts to annex Canada, which were sadly unsuccessful, and also filibustering, which before it meant a senator talking until he or she had to stop to pee, was a thing where we tried to take over Central America to spread slavery. But the idea of taking Cuba persisted into the late 19th century because it is close and also beautiful. The Grant administration wanted to annex it and the Dominican Republic, but Congress demurred. But we did succeed in purchasing Canada's tail. You can see how I feel about that. To be fair, discovery of gold in the Yukon made Seward's icebox seem like less of a Seward's folly, and it did provide coaling stations in the Pacific. But we could have had rum and Caribbean beaches. Oh, Stan, all this talk about how much I hate Alaska has me overheated. I gotta take off my shirt.
Okay. Hi, everyone. And I just wanted to show you that. So since you're writing your paragraphs this week on whether or not the U.S. should formally apologize to Hawaiians for annexing Hawaii. That relates to this American expansion. Okay, so let me go back to my lesson plan and remind myself of what we want to talk about today. And I always want to try to show you how these ideas are important in terms of what's going on in the present. And so you can see, make sure I can close this because it's the European Union organization. Okay, so here's the lesson plan for our class. By the way, we do have our first student has signed up for a debate. And so Rachel, unless somebody decides by, tomorrow that they want to be Khan, I will be Rachel's opponent in our meeting on Wednesday on the question of whether or not the U.S. should formally apologize to the Hawaiian people for the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. And so Rachel is pro, and it looks like I'm going to be Khan unless somebody signs up for it. And you can do that if you'd like. Okay, and so, oh, by the way, I should also mention that this month is officially Hispanic Heritage Month in the United States. So a couple weeks ago, we talked about the Mexican-American War and the position of Hispanics in America and their stereotyping as a minority group, as a so-called backward minority. So just to open up those notes, because we're going to use those notes probably today in describing or discussing ethnicity. And let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, ethnocentrism here. These notes that we started talking about at the beginning of the semester in terms of trying to understand race relations and polarization between blacks and whites and Hispanics and other minorities in the United States, that African Americans, Hispanics, Indigenous Americans, Indians, in other words, they are stereotyped by the core group. In this case, WASP, which is the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, is the term we use for these people in the United States. The core group that founded the United States, that are the dominant group politically, economically, and they therefore tend to dominate the political system, the system of authority norms, of right and wrong behavior, and award and punishment for acting in certain ways, including how people look and talk. I mean, we talk about core group, we also mean cultural core group, so that, for example, the ideal, most handsome American is unfortunately a white, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, person. That is also part of the stereotypes of what it means to be an American, or depending upon your different country, like mestizo in Mexico, Italian culture in Argentina, Portuguese culture in Brazil. You could look to other examples historically, Ashkenazi European Jews in Israel. This core group, Boers in South Africa, of course, this changed since Boers are, African Dutch farmers who migrated as settler colonists to South Africa. They have been removed as the dominant economic political group. They still dominate the society economically. So, like Jews in Europe and Armenians in the Middle East, they are in this category, right? This is so-called advanced minorities. But these include, like I mentioned, Armenians in the Middle East tend to be stereotyped in this way, the anti-Semitic stereotype, the way Europeans describe Jews, or the way, for example, people in Southeast Asia tend to describe Chinese, who also tend to dominate the economic system. I mean, the stereotype we call the anti-Semitic stereotype in Europe, right? That, what is the stereotype? The anti-Semitic stereotype that Jews are oriented only towards money, that that they will sell their mother to make money, and that they're conspiratorial and focused only on helping each other. And of course, during wartime, it's dangerous because they are seen as they're not loyal. They're suspicious as supposedly not being loyal to the homeland. And so in worst case scenarios, they can be targeted with genocidal attacks. And we saw that in Armenia at the end of the First World War in the Ottoman Empire, and elsewhere. You've seen genocidal attacks against the Chinese minority in Southeast Asia over the post-Cold War period. I mean, the post-war period, like for example, in the 1970s in Indonesia. But these so-called peoples of color, typically as a term that's commonly used in the United States to describe these African Americans, Indigenous Americans, Hispanic Americans that are perceived as backward and understood to be childlike in terms of their orientation towards the core. The core group that sets the standards, rightly or wrongly, justly or unjustly. They tend to set the standards for comparison for evaluating the behavior of this group and this group. And of course, these people will tend to be viewed with contempt, right? That, you know, these people will tend to view these people as needing stern guidance to become civilized. Like children, they need to be raised properly, and they're not responsible enough to be able to take care of themselves. They have to be controlled because they're stereotyped as children, basically. And of course, that's how you justify controlling and dominating, exploiting them, because they need to be controlled for their own good, of course, because that's human nature. You know, human beings tend to see the world in a way that's self-serving. In other words, I want to understand the world in a way that allows me to feel good about doing whatever it is deeply I want to do. And if I see these people as vulnerable to exploitation, I want to see them in a way that will justify to me and to you why we should exploit them, right? That we're doing them a favor. We're civilizing them. We're civilizing them. So the civilizing mission in the British Empire, of course. And again, the stereotype of these people as childlike reflects itself, for example, in one of the, you know, bad terms you can use to describe black people is to just call a black man a boy. Even if the black man is 80 years old, calling him a boy, right? That he's not really an equal human being. He's childlike, even if he's an old man. And of course, the British in the British Empire, they just openly called their servants and attendants in India, you know, their boy, right? And so, but these people tend to be stereotyped in terms of the anti-Semitic stereotype, right? And of course, and these people are stereotyped as being lazy, they don't want to work, right? They're unhygienic. All the stereotypes we see towards African Americans and Hispanics in the United States. But and of course, this is the justification that we use for empire. The empire is a civilizing mission. Building empires is bringing civilization to an uncivilized part of the world, whether it be the Western United States, you know, in terms of manifest destiny. It's the manifest destiny of the United States to spread, you know, capitalism and democracy and Christianity to the West, and even beyond, of course, into the Pacific Ocean, into Asia. I mean, this bar here refers to the different levels of political mobilization amongst the mass of the population, right? That this group, because it's more focused on trade and commerce historically, whether we talk about Jews or Armenians or Greeks in the Ottoman Empire, they tend to be more politically aware because they're more involved in social change and dynamics that comes from trade and commerce. And so they tend to be ahead in this political mobilization process. And so they tend to have disproportionate levels of political and economic status within the state. And these people will be stereotyped. We already mentioned the anti-Semitic stereotype. The emotions that associates with them is not contempt, like it is of this group in the core towards this group. Contempt and even disgust. The emotion that associates with this stereotype, the anti-Semitic stereotype, is envy. That these people are prosperous and influential, and it's not fair. They have what I want here in the core, but they don't look and act like they should act. And how should they act? Well, they should act like the core, this group, right? And so I think somebody's trying to remind me that we need to do the attendance. So thank you. I'll do that in a second here. So how they should act is how I set it up here in the core, because we dominate the political system. We dominate the society. So we just assume that everybody should be like this. So America for the Americans. And what's an American? It's a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And you are tolerated in this core group, in this, this so-called backward minority. And these people are viewed with envy. They have something that I want, but they don't deserve it. They got it unfairly. They didn't act in the right way. They don't look the right way. They don't talk the right way. They talk with an accent. They don't worship God in the right way. They don't dress in the right way. And yet they have money. And yet they have influence, even though they're a small section of the population. And it's not right. I have envy towards them, right? So, and of course, this process, the United States is a country we described here as a country that's born modern. So pretty much most people that came to the United States, except for the enslaved people, they chose to come to the United States. So a country that was born modern. There's not as much respect for the past, although there is a lot of respect for the past in the United States, right? The old and traditional that's established by this group. But the people in this group, let's say, in a European country or an Asian country, as this change process that we described earlier occurs, and more of the adult population becomes aware of the possibility of change and starts evaluating people in terms of their status and respect in terms of achievement versus their place in which they were born, the status into which they were born as a member of a family. The shift from ascription to achievement is the basis for status in a society. The shift from ascription to achievement is the essence of modernity. That there will be a group of people that oppose change and are aware of it, and there will be this group versus this group that is aware of change and favors it. And these people want to carry out, typically they want to carry out revolutions against these people because these people rule. They typically are the ones that dominate the old political system. And these people want to change the system so they can counter opposition from this group. And this group, in terms of empire, they will appeal to the outside actors, whether it be the French, the British, the Japanese. I mean, Koreans, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Korean monarchy actually requested the Japanese come in and help them put down the Donghak Rebellion in 1905 and in Korea, because the Donghak Rebellion threatened the ruling elite and its position in Korea society. So they actually requested help from the Japanese. And of course, the Japanese provided that help, and then they stayed, which is what you see happen typically. You also see that also in this group of category of people, that this group, but also this group in general, will be more prone to appeal to outsiders, the British, the Russians, the Americans, the French, the Germans for help, particularly against this group, because this is a minority, and this group is going to feel threatened by nationalism, because nationalism associates with the core group, the biggest group, typically the majority of the population that dominates the society, the state. So this group will tend to feel threatened from nationalism. And you see that in the Middle East. Traditionally, it's Armenians that are cooperating with the British and the French and the Germans, whomever else they can appeal to help them against the Iranians or the Arabs, because of the perceived threat that they see from mass politics and mass nationalism from the majority of the population. So so again, I guess this is a pattern you see everywhere. And of course, America comes later to this game, when the Americans decide that they want to exploit business and economic opportunities in Asia, and they want a navy and naval bases to support the American Navy so that they can get their economic interests promoted in Asia, particularly with China. And so that is one of many incentives the Americans have, not the only one, to overthrow the Hawaiian monarchy. There are economic interests. There are the fruit company interests, agricultural interests like Dole, Dole Company that provides the pineapple pieces that you can buy downstairs at the CU convenience store, right? They've always been present in Hawaii, and also in 1883, when the Korean emperor king makes a treaty with the United States. You also begin to see Korean communities emerging in Hawaii, being brought there as agricultural laborers to work in Hawaii in the agricultural sector. So probably the oldest Korean community in the United States can be located in Hawaii, because they came to provide for workers for the agricultural interests of American companies there. And of course, also the Americans wanted that area as a Navy base for operations in the Middle East. I'm sorry, in the Pacific Ocean. Hawaii is the most isolated piece of territory in the world, and so it's an ideal place to have a Navy base. And And so there were a lot of factors that came in to the American decision to overthrow the ruling elite. But of course, economic security, but primarily economic and economic interests, and including the economic interests of doing and exploiting opportunities in Asia in general. So so again, I wanted to again go back and highlight some of these points we talked about earlier. So I think we had Mr. Park Sun-woo, who was played the Black Seminole in a previous exercise we had in class, and this is probably a good point to do the attendance, because I'll forget, like I am tending to do here. And so let me open up the attendance file. But there was a news report that came out, again, an update news report regarding the conditions of the Black people that were enslaved people within the Indian tribes that the American government was moving out west. And I wanted to show you some latest news report in terms of that development. But before we do that, we can do the attendance here. So here we are in week 7, and your smart attendance number is 368. 368 is your smart attendance number. So I go to here and I type in chat, and 368 is your smart attendance number. Okay. And so let me open up that file that I want to show you all here about the let's see, where is it here? I have again too many things to show you. Just a second here. What did I do with that? 1 second. Let me find it like this. Black. Yeah, like this. Well, I seem like I misplaced it somewhere. That's not very good. Oh, here it is. Okay. I forgot to update the file. So again, this is not only, but particularly for Mr. Pak, because Mr. Pak had to play this actor in one of the exercises, the Black Seminoles. It states here that you can see that tribal judge rules in favor of citizenship for descendants of the Creek slaves. So the Creeks were one of those Indian tribes that were moved in the 1820s under Andrew Jackson out west to Oklahoma. And so this is from just a couple weeks ago, this news report at the end of last month. The judge for the Muskogee Creek Nation, Oklahoma, ruled that the tribe had violated an 1866 treaty by barring descendants of slaves from being tribal citizens. So this judge has ruled that these enslaved people that were held by the Indians that were then forcibly transferred in the Trail of Tears in what we now call ethnic cleansing since the 1990s, that a judge has ruled that it says here, Judge Danette Mauser of the tribe's district court, because these tribes living on the reservation have state sovereignty. They have sovereignty like states have sovereignty. So they have their own judicial systems. They have their own court systems, their own police systems, like states have their own judicial court systems, right? So Judge Danette Mauser of the tribe's district court ruled on Wednesday in favor of 2 descendants of tribal slaves known as freedmen who had applied for citizenship in the Muskogee Nation but were denied because of their ancestry. It goes on to say here, in the Civil War era, many tribes in Oklahoma allied themselves with the Confederacy and fought to preserve the institution of slavery, that's interesting. Oklahoma was the state area where they were moved. Remember, we did that exercise in class about the forced movement on the Trail of Tears. After the war, a series of treaties in 1866 between the federal government and the 5 tribes in Oklahoma, including the Muskogee Nation, abolished slavery and granted their former slaves all the rights of citizens in the tribal nations. And it states here, at the center of the dispute over tribal citizenship is a federal census of Native American tribes compiled in the early 1900s that divided members by race into black and non-black tribal roles, respectively known as freedmen, and by blood roles. So this was adopted because of the concern that that lots of people that claimed Indian heritage were not full-blooded Indians, and they would maybe overwhelm the population that did not have as many family connections outside of the reservation. So it says here in the, it says here, make sure you're still seeing that. In the 1970s, the principal chief of the Muskogee Nation at the time, Claude Cox, expressed fear that blood citizens of the nation would be outnumbered by black citizens. At a meeting of the Tribes National Council in 1977, he said that full bloods had lost control of the tribe and that the nation needed a constitution that will keep the Creek Nation in control. And so, so basically, this judge has ruled that decision to exclude enslaved people that were part of the tribe when the tribe owned slaves until 1866. They are now part of the Muskogee Nation, and so again, this has been an ongoing issue. And of course, there are benefits that come with being a member of the Muskogee Nation. If you're living there on, for example, that area, there are certain services that only members of the tribe are allowed to access. So another article here to show you is this report from a little bit earlier time about how medical services for people living on the reservation were only limited to people that were citizens of the tribe. So black people living, children, descendants of the freedmen, were not eligible to the special medical care opportunities made available to Native Americans because they were not considered members of the tribe. So it says, this is from a couple years ago. The Indian National Service announced this week that Black Native Americans in the Seminole Nation, known as the Freedmen, will now be eligible for health care through the federal agency, which previously denied them coronavirus vaccinations and other care. And the shift in policy comes as the Biden administration and members of Congress are pressuring the Seminole and other Native tribes in Oklahoma to desegregate their constitutions and include the freedmen, many of whom are descendants of Black people who had been held as slaves by the tribes, as well as equal citizens of their tribes under their post-Civil War treaty obligations. Okay, so again, you know, there are real material consequences of not being citizens of the tribes. And so, Mr. Park, is Mr. Park attending today? I don't know if Mr. Park is actually there. I can check to see if he's actually in the class, but
Professor, I'm here.
Okay, Mr. Park, let me see here. Let me okay, Mr. Park, what is your feeling as a honorary Black Seminole? What is your emotional spontaneous response to acquiring full tribal rights as a finally gaining full tribal rights as a tribal citizen of the Seminole or Creek nations? What is your feeling? Are you feeling empowered? Are you feeling finally more respect and dignity that has been denied you because of your previous expulsion or exclusion from membership among your people?
Oh, I think it's a good change, but isn't it a little too late?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously some opportunities there. Somebody sees in this political mobilization process, they see opportunities that are available to them. We already mentioned this is from 2 years ago, so coronavirus was a big problem. Maybe, I don't know, I haven't investigated, but I told you, for example, that beginning about 50 years ago, a lot of these Indian reservations were using their sovereignty once it was reaffirmed in the court system by saying, hey, remember, U.S. government, you signed this treaty with my nation, with my people, so we have sovereignty. And the Supreme Court said, okay, yeah, you have sovereignty, like the Ohio and Texas and Pennsylvania and California, and the states have sovereignty. So they were then using that new ruling from the Supreme Court to set up casinos for gambling and making a lot of money out of doing that. And so I don't know. Were these freedmen not able to participate in that because they were not members of the tribe? So you're not allowed to set up a casino because that's only for tribal members. Maybe that's one concrete material benefit, right? Of course, as people become more and more aware of the possibility of changing their condition and acting to acquire social mobility and social creativity, and by political action, then they are politically aware. And so you might say that this is a manifestation of those. You can't. I mean, it's hard to imagine a more marginalized, segregated, despised member of a society. This is not even just a Black person who are subject to racism by white people, but they were considered inferior even by another despised minority, Indian Americans. I mean, it must be really difficult particularly difficult to live in that kind of a situation, that you are not only Black, but you're a descendant of an enslaved Indian people. So you live among those people, but you are considered to be inferior to them. I mean, it's hard to imagine a more disadvantaged group of people than freedmen. So here you see now these people are acting to get the benefits of being members of a tribe, which, like I said, I haven't investigated beyond reading what I read in the New York Times. I just don't have the time, right? But it would be interesting to see what these freedmen are seeking in this way, like, to participate, for example, in these profitable gambling and casino institutions that are now pretty much everywhere in the United States, and often set up by these Indian tribes. Okay, there you go, change. And again, I mean, this process of stereotyping, I guess I also want to make this as interesting as possible for the class, including showing how it relates to Korean Americans, because we already mentioned how Koreans first came to America. I think they came to Hawaii to work in Hawaii as agricultural workers. But more recently, since the 1960s, there has been a big influx of immigrants in the United States from Asia. So, the American story about, supposedly the Americans tell this story to themselves about how they love immigrants, right? Bring me your poor, this is, of course, a famous, let me open that up, a famous statue in the United States at Ellis Island in New York City Harbor, where you see a big statue monument that was set up as a gift from the French to the Americans. And again, this is a very famous, iconic image, this Statue of Liberty, right? And you can see this was given as a gift to the United States, and it's supposed to welcome all of the immigrants coming into America at this time. And of course, the core group, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, they are suspicious of these people that are not like them. These Catholics from Southern Europe, these Jews from Eastern Europe, these Orthodox Christians from Poland and Serbia coming in, and from Russia coming in, and of course also, but they're coming in, and of course also Chinese and Koreans in the latter part. Well, not even the latter part. I mean, in the second half of the 19th century, this labor is being brought in from Asia, particularly in the western part of the United States, to build the new railroads. And there's a lot of hostility, resentment, and stereotyping and suspicion among that core group, the WASPs, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, towards those groups. And but America likes to tell itself a story about how it's a country built upon immigrants, how it likes immigrants, and that is true to the extent that basically, to make more money, you needed workers. So we did that in the exercise last week about how, if you're going to agree to free the slaves, and you're going to allow, if you're Abraham Lincoln, to allow your workers to take free land, to leave their factories in Boston and New York, and go out west and take free land in the Homestead Act that was adopted under the Lincoln administration, you're going to have to make some kind of compromises with the factory owners in terms of, well, how are we going to make our lands? How are we going to have workers to work in our factories without paying them lots and lots of money? And of course, that decision was made basically to agree to bring in more immigrants. And you need the immigrants to work in your factories so that you as the business owners can make money with workers in your factories. You also need these people in order to fill up the country. You need these people to populate the country, right? You need to, and of course that was a concern with Andrew Jackson, that supposedly that land in what is today Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia needed to be taken, and Louisiana needed to be taken so that he could give them to settlers to encourage settlement in that area, which is supposedly necessary for economic and security reasons, right? So there wasn't this love of immigrants. There was this utilitarian economic benefit. But then this continues until 1924. And then this hostile reaction to all this immigration in the United States, particularly with World War I, which we'll talk about, I think, next week, right? World War I and the Bolshevik Revolution in the Russian Empire, and this growing xenophobia against these people that don't look like Northern Europeans. They have different religions, they have different cultures, they speak different languages, and they're aware of different ideologies. They're talking in terms of socialism. So there's a strong reaction. In 1924, the U.S. finally adopts legislation to stop immigration. So I told you my own family's history, that my great grandfather, and I think a number of his brothers, 3 or 4 brothers, all of them, they went to America to work and make money around the turn of the century before 1924, around 1900. And like about 30% of those immigrants who came to America, they made some money and they went back home. Which, of course, my relatives attacked my older relatives for this. Why would you come back? There's nothing here. You should have stayed in America. But they came back home. They came back to Italy. They went back to Italy. And my father, told me stories about how one of his grand uncles, the brother of his grandfather, he served in the American Army in World War I. So when the Americans entered World War I in April 1917, he joined the U.S. Army and fought in the U.S. Army. And so he went back to Italy, and he got a pension payment from the U.S. Army from his service in the U.S. Army. And so he had some problems. He was an alcoholic. And so whenever his pension check would come from the U.S. Army arrive in Italy, he would spend it all in this bar and get drunk. And one of my father's jobs was to go to the bar and pick him up, and take him home. But there was a lot of immigration that generated a lot of hostile reaction, including the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, the new second version of the Ku Klux Klan that emerged in the 19 teens after World War I into 1920s. That wasn't only anti-Black and hostile to Black people, but also hostile to Catholics and Jews. And because these immigrants were Catholics and Jews. And they were strong enough that in 1924, the U.S. stopped immigration, pretty much restricted immigration, and would not renew it until 1964. When Lyndon Johnson administration, that is criticized for the failure in Vietnam, the Lyndon Johnson administration that adopted lots of civil rights legislation. It also changed the U.S. immigration laws to allow renewed immigration. And so there was a big influx of new immigrants, and this time from Asia. And Asian Americans are the fastest growing minority in the United States. And these included Korean Americans as well as other Asians coming in. But those Korean immigrants that came into the United States, they tended to be the more educated English-speaking immigrants. And so they tend to be the more prosperous, well-done immigrants, or the ones that had skills that would allow them to be successful in the United States. So Korean Americans tended to be more prosperous, more ambitious, more like immigrants in general. And so, you see, for example, a lot of Korean Americans, they work as, doctors working in American medical institutions, American universities, but also just a lot of immigrants coming in, and they would come in, including the poor Korean immigrants, and they would look for opportunities, and they would do incredible things like, Americans have the stereotype, particularly white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, they have the stereotype of Black people and Black neighborhoods as being incredibly dangerous, that you don't want to go there because it could be very dangerous for you if you go into this area, and you could be attacked, you could be assaulted, something very bad could happen to you in these areas. So I'll make sure you can see this again, this screen. So white Anglo-Saxon Protestants maybe don't take advantage of the economic opportunities, but Korean Americans, they would come into places like Los Angeles or other cities, and they would settle in cities for the most part, and they would open up convenience stores. They would open up little stores in these Black, African American, and Hispanic neighborhoods in order to, make money and deal with the challenges, because it's a place with high crime, a lot of guns, a lot of violence. But these Korean Americans would come in and they would open up stores, being ambitious, being not being controlled by these stereotypes, seeing these as opportunities, and they would go in and set up these stores. And then my point is that Korean Americans have also been targeted in this area, because something very important for the Korean American community was an event that happened over 30 years ago. That's 31 years ago, in 1992, with the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles, when a Black man was beaten up by Los Angeles police. Now, Los Angeles is one of the biggest areas for Asian immigration, particularly Korean immigration, right? Into the United States is Los Angeles. And this beating of this Black man by the police was recorded on the police car cameras. The police cars were. No, somebody recorded this beating. It was recorded on video camera, and it was broadcast. And these policemen, these white policemen who beat up this Black man, was put on trial. They were put on trial for beating up this Black man, and they were found not guilty in the trial. This is over 30 years ago, and as a consequence of being found not guilty in the trial. There was an explosion of rioting that occurred in Los Angeles that killed over 50, I think like 54 people were killed in this rioting, and over $1 billion of damage. And Korean Americans were targeted by this rioting. That these rioters attacked stores, and they selected particularly Korean stores. Stores would avoid being looted and destroyed and things stolen from them by writing on the storefront, Black owned store. This store is Black owned. And then the rioters would go after the Korean stores. So the Koreans have been stereotyped by these groups in sharing the stereotype that the majority population has towards this group, the anti-Semitic stereotype. The Korean Americans have been targeted with this anti-Semitic stereotype as well. And so this was a shock, because there were hundreds, maybe even thousands of Korean institutions, Korean businesses attacked. And the police didn't intervene. Very little was done to stop them, these attacks. And this was a landmark event for the Korean community in the United States, right? Korean Americans, until that point, they had not been very politically active. They focused on doing their jobs, making some money, right? But then after this event, particularly their sons and daughters, then reacted to this injustice by becoming more politically active and mobilized and lobbying on behalf of Korean American and Korean interests. It was a shocking event. And it sounds like it's a long time ago, and it was over 30 years ago. But then it happened again in 2015. It happened again just 8 years ago. This time in Baltimore, where Korean stores were targeted and looted in response to, again, a jury of white people finding the police not guilty for the death of a Black man who'd been arrested and died in custody. And again, rioting started in Baltimore and targeted the Korean American community. Right? Again, with this anti-Semitic stereotype that these people, they don't care about anybody else about themselves. They don't care about the well-being of these people or these people, that these people in these stores, these Korean stores sell freely sell alcohol and tobacco to the black people, which makes them, sick and keeps them addicted. And they like selling this alcohol because it makes a lot of money. And I mean, the same way that, for example, Ukrainians and Polish nationalists here talk about Jewish people. I've heard it again and again and again that they resent in Poland and Ukraine Jews because Jews, typically in the Russian Empire, they were the ones that sold alcohol to these people and promoted their alcohol problems, their alcoholism. Because the Jews, they don't care about these people. They only care about making money, and they'll sell, whatever these people want, all the alcohol they want in order to make money at the expense of the terrible, terrible alcoholism that characterizes, Eastern European, particularly Polish and Russian society. I mean, Poles and Russians are notorious as being the biggest, have been historically notorious as being the biggest drinkers in Eastern Europe. I think that's fascinating. So I think I have some video clips of this. Here's the Rodney King riots here covered in the news reports. Of course, he was speeding in his car. The police tried to stop him. He wouldn't stop. There was a high-speed chase, very dangerous. They finally cornered his car, made it stop, and the police were so furious that they started beating him. He, of course, had a drug problem, an alcohol problem. He died from a drug overdose. He had a lot of problems, the Rodney King beating. So let me see if I have the video here. I should have the video here on the, and here, as you can see, the reference to the Los Angeles riots. I think you can see this here. So you can see the Los Angeles riots that happened in 1992. Also called the Rodney King riots, the 1980 Los Angeles rioting, destroyed remains of buildings burns in this riots. What does it say? It says here, 63 people died, almost 2,400 injured. The damage was $1 billion in 1992 money. So it's a lot of money. Let me see if I can find and of course, it looks like the kind of attacks that we saw in Eastern Europe on Jews, what's called a pogrom, a spontaneous uprising of resentment and envy by the mass of the population against a so-called advanced minority, right? So the term is pogrom, in describing this against the Jews in the Russian Empire and Ukraine and Polish areas. But again, you see similar patterns in Indonesia against the Chinese minority in the 1970s. And now you even see it in the US against the Korean minority in these black neighborhoods where the Koreans have set up stores that sell, like 7-Eleven stores that sell everything, including, whiskey and alcohol, right? I think that's fascinating. And so I think I have here, let me see if this works. Hopefully this works here. And so we go here, let me share.
Dramatic videotape obtained by Channel 5 News shows what appears to be a group of LAPD officers beating a suspect.
As soon as it hit the airwaves, it created a firestorm. Video recorded by a man named George Holliday from the balcony of his apartment in Lakeview Terrace. It showed LAPD officers beating Rodney King with their batons and kicking him for 15 minutes after he led cops on a high-speed chase. King was on parole for robbery. Congresswoman Karen Bass remembers her reaction.
Many of us who had been trying to convince.
Karen Bass, she's just been elected mayor of Los Angeles, the first Black woman to be mayor of Los Angeles. So she's got a bright political future. People are paying a lot of attention to her, that she might well have a national political future in the US. I mean, like run for national office.
Public that these kind of incidences were happening, were almost relieved. It was like finally it was on camera and the world was going to be able to see, and we would finally be able to hold police officers accountable.
King suffered a fractured skull and other injuries from the beating.
I thought they were going to kill me. That's what I thought. After they tied me up like that, handcuffed me, I thought I was going to die. I did.
If it turns out that this is excessive in nature, we will take very stern action to deal with it.
Then Police Chief Daryl Gates called the actions of his officers an aberration. Still, 4 of them were charged with assault and using excessive force, and they were put on trial in Simi Valley. More than a year later, the jury returned its verdict.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Stacy C. Kuhn, not guilty.
All 4 officers were acquitted. PR consultant Kerman Maddox lived in South LA at the time.
I just couldn't fathom in my mind what they didn't see. They saw the same thing we saw, and I just couldn't imagine any jury or anybody concluding that what we saw was not an egregious case of police brutality, and how they can determine that these guys were not guilty was just stunning.
Hey, get that camera out of my face, okay?
That night, the anger boiled over. The rioting, burning, and looting began at the corner of Florence and Normandy. It lasted for several days. When it was over, 50 people were dead and more than 2,000 hurt. In the aftermath, there were lasting changes to the LAPD.
We actually have.
Let me see if I can find something a little shorter. Yeah, of course, and of course, also you get to see Korean store owners trying to defend and protect their stores, right? So this is interesting. I think. Let me see if this comes up. Make sure I can share the right screen. Screen share.
At that time, I was in the gun store.
I tried to, make the screen bigger and it screws up the share screen. So I want to make sure you watch all of that. So let me do the share screen again here.
At that time, I was in the gun store. Then I have received a phone call from my employer. His name is Richard Park. He also owned a jewelry store right down the block there. And he said, David, we're having a gunfighting here. So can you just come over and help us? We already called police. And when I arrived here, at the beginning, I can see the LAPD, the vehicle with like 3-4 officers were there. So, we have a police here. We are safe. But as soon as the gun fighting started, they ran away. Fine. So, we are on our own. Then what I saw from across the street is a lot of looters were armed, heavily armed, and they're shooting at us. My experience was, whoever attacked and looting the Koreatown was not the African Americans. It was more likely Hispanic cholos or the gangbangers. Really was coming to my face here and there, so I thought I'm going to get shot. So, naturally, I just trying to protect my face, my hands like this momentarily. Then I was thinking, oh, wait a minute, what am I doing? So I just, put it down. Whoever actually saw having guns, I didn't hesitate to shoot them. Otherwise, I could have got shot. Some of them are popping up from there and there with their shotgun and handguns. In retrospect, it's a dangerous moment. And I was scared. But even though you're scared, you don't have much option. You have to fight. Korean people are very frustrated. Koreatown was damaged and destroyed.
This is a brutalization of truth. That's the tragedy of America. We thought that videotape was going to make a difference. 25.
So let me see what else I have here. It's worth showing here. Yeah, and then it happens in the Baltimore riots in 2015. Again, Korean shops on a much smaller scale in response to the killing of Freddie Gray, another Black person who was arrested by the police, and then he died in police custody. And so this is the case we still don't know how he died. I don't know. I mean, I follow the news every day, and I still don't know how this guy died. Supposedly, he was in the back of a police van. The police van was driving wildly, and he broke his neck or his somehow, and nobody's been charged for this. And then, of course, he was found. The police were found not guilty. And again, there were riots this time in Baltimore. And again, Korean stores were targeted. And like a mini pogrom, a mini Los Angeles. So just to see this video here, hopefully this works.
Dozens of
And if you zoom, go to that, I will do that, stop share, screen share here.
Of businesses run by Korean Americans have become the victims in the Baltimore riots. Approximately 20 Korean American owned stores were looted and some were set on fire Monday night during the upheaval. Before the flare began, the Korean American owners closed their doors and removed themselves from the area, preventing any casualties. Overall, there were 230 arrests made and at least 20 officers were wounded in the unrest. About 19 buildings and 120 cars in the area were set ablaze in what started as a peaceful demonstration turned violent. A citywide curfew went into effect Tuesday night in Baltimore.
Okay, so yeah, just to show you the this theoretical framework that I'm using. There's something about Homo sapiens, about human beings, that they have a, generally speaking, they're predisposed in terms of their brain wiring, in terms of their DNA that shapes their brain wiring to engage in this kind of stereotyping of so-called advanced versus so-called backward minorities, and the stereotyping that they have towards each other. And that just again really illustrates this impact of nationalism in terms of how it manifests itself in political behavior. Yeah. So again, the difference between the perceived cultural difference that exists between the core group, like in Germany in 1870. That depends upon the differential speed with which we talked about in class earlier about the shift from ascription to achievement as the base of status, right? So the advanced minorities are stereotyped as advanced, or with the anti-Semitic stereotype, because they go through that change process earlier. And typically it's among minority groups in Europe and Asia that are, in terms of a caste system, a de facto caste system, they are the groups that are involved in trade and commerce, right? Like, again, Greeks and Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, Jews in Europe, Chinese in Southeast Asia, Indian from South Asia in the British Empire, in East Africa, Arabs, Christian Arabs in West Africa are heavily predominant, for example, in the diamond trade in that area. And they are all subject to this anti-Semitic stereotyping and the policy behavior and violence that can emerge around it. Pogroms, we call them, against Jews. I mean, and so, but the perceived difference between the groups depends upon between the minority and the core, depends upon the differential speed with which this change process happens. It's ironic that in Germany, of course, was the place that Jewish minority felt most comfortable, because there was this perceived cultural difference. D was smallest there between the German core and the Jewish minority. It was wider in Poland, and most wide in Iraq. Say in 1950, when the Jewish minority was fully politically aware, pretty much. There had been a Jewish minority, a Jewish civilization in Iraq for thousands of years, right, in Mesopotamia. Now there's only a few thousand Jews left in Iraq. They've all fled, and now the Christians are fleeing. The Christian minority in Iraq is also now fleeing Iraq, and of course this is the Arab majority, which say in 1950 only 5 to 10% of the population was politically aware. The rest of these groups were this group was still traditional. They were not Arab nationalists, right? So yeah, and so the perceived difference between the advanced, so-called advanced minority and the core will determine the ease with which these groups assimilate into the core. And you're seeing this assimilation of Jewish Americans into American society. I mean, even Donald Trump, his daughter married Jared Kushner, an Orthodox Jew, converted to Judaism, and Donald Trump, the representative of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant identity, right? The WASP core, right? Donald Trump, who that's the base of his support, white religious nationalists in America. He's got no problem with his daughter marrying a rich Jewish man. So it shows this assimilation process is happening in the United States. And it's manifested, for example, in rates of intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews. You know, Protestants and Catholics, that used to be an issue 100 years ago, but Protestants and Catholics pretty much freely intermarry now. I mean, we already described how the US Supreme Court only has one Protestant on it among the 9 Supreme Court justices who converted to Episcopalian religion when he married his Episcopalian wife. He grew up Catholic. The other judges are Jews and Catholics. So Catholics and Jewish Americans are fully assimilating into this core group. The question is, will it lead to the diaspora losing a strong self-identification with Israel? And that's a much slower process. I mean, you know, with the rioting and violence going on in the Middle East, you're seeing even liberal Jewish America and liberal Jews who oppose the right-wing government in Israel signing up for their and returning for their army duty in Israel. If Israel comes under threat, I think American Jews will tend to rally around Israel. I mean, it's again this element of nationalism, that to have your own state for your nation. I mean, that is such a privilege. I mean, there are thousands of ethnic groups in the world, thousands and thousands. Estimates of 3,000 to 5,000 different ethnic groups in the world. There's only 200 states, only less than 200 members of the United Nations. They are states. I mean, it's great to have your own state. And Jews since 1948 have their own state. And they, and some of them have aspirations for Israel to become a great power. I mean, not challenge the United States, but be on a level, for example, in the Middle East as to what a European or other great middle range power in the world would be. I mean, I think that's the aspiration of some of these elements that support the Netanyahu government. You know, they have aspirations for Israel that go just beyond having a safe place for Jews to live. It's a place for Jews to play a leading role in world affairs, including through his power capabilities. So, you know, giving up Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem, I don't think it's not going to happen unless, you know, because America's political support is too strong and the Israel lobby is too strong in the United States. Of course, other groups that are in that advanced category, you know, Dutch Catholics versus Protestants, French Huguenots, right? French Huguenots in France, WASP in the US are a core group. Zoroastrians and Mossadegh Iran, they were advanced minority, and so on. Sikhs and Punjab, Christians in Syria. As I said, Christians are also in this category in Syria and Iraq, and now they're leaving and, you know, moving to places like the United States. Okay, so yeah, so again, so-called people of color, Hispanics, African Americans, and Indigenous Americans, Black and brown peoples, they tend to be targeted with this kind of stereotyping, right? That they're not viewed with envy, they're viewed with contempt, and they're exploited, right? Accordingly. So okay, so having said all of that, let's go back to a discussion of U.S. history. Hooray, U.S. history! And so we already did our attendance, and so let me go back to the cyber campus and go to material, and again make sure you can see all of this. So we're going to so screen And so we scroll down here. And so we have to reconstruct the United States. Hooray, reconstruct the United States. So you can see, all of you can see this, so you can open this up on your computers here. Oh, this is, I don't know if I really want to focus too much on this. This is too elaborate and involved. We don't have the time for this, so maybe we'll come back to this later. I posted that for you to look at it if you're interested. But if we go here to the challenges confronting the so-called freed people in America, right? That they were, slavery is formally ended, but these people have nothing, right? They have nothing. They don't even own the clothes on their backs do not belong to them. They're no longer officially enslaved, but they don't have any land. They don't have any. Even the place where they are living, the sheds that they are living on the plantations don't belong to them. They don't have, not to mention, they don't own any land. They were not allowed to be educated typically because so they're illiterate. At least 90% of these enslaved people are illiterate. It describes here in this exercise. In 1865-66, the war is over. This is a joyous time. The horrors of slavery are ended. In millions of gestures, large and small, Black people in America resisted slavery from its very beginning in 1619. You won your freedom with the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which ended slavery once and for all. All through the summer of 1865, there's been parades and celebrations. This is a time of unbelievable excitement, but also apprehension. What exactly does freedom mean? What kind of lives will you have now? True, you are free to leave the plantation. You are free to go north, free to travel, free to seek out lost family members who have been sold off. But you're also free to starve, free to be attacked by angry whites seeking revenge, free to be kicked out of your homes by defeated plantation owners. So consider all the problems you face. And this, of course, is the legacy of slavery that still prevails today, right? That these people are still viewed and stereotyped with suspicion in the United States. Consider all the problems you face. For the last 250 years, enslaved people were robbed of their labor and their knowledge in order to make white people rich. Now in freedom, you own absolutely nothing. Even though you have lived your entire lives in the South, the shack you live in is owned by your former owner. Same with all of the tools, work animals, and seed. Even the clothes you have on are owned by the family that enslaved you. Most important, you own no land. Without land, you will always be dependent, always forced to serve the property owners. You want to farm your own land and grow your food for your families. There are other problems as well. At least 90% of you are illiterate. Under slavery, it was a crime to teach an enslaved person to read or write. Some learned anyway, but most had no opportunity. Most of you own no guns. Almost all firearms in the South are owned by former enslavers and the whites who fought for the Confederacy. Remember, however, that the Union Army still occupies much of the South, and some Union soldiers used to be held in slavery like you. Also, you have no political rights. You can't vote or hold office. So that will begin to change. There's a lot of talk among the African American community, among activists in the African American community, about an order given by General Sherman at the end of the Civil War, in which he ordered. Let me see if I can call this up here. Field Order number 15, and show you what this was. Right. So stop share. Let me show you the screen. So there you can see General Sherman, one of the successful Union generals in the war, and he issued a special order that ordered the land that was abandoned by the slave owners in certain areas along the Atlantic coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, to that land, which is about 400,000 acres, to be divided up into parcels of no more than 40 acres, on which were to be settled 18,000 formerly enslaved families and other Black people then living in the area. So he also ordered the old donkeys that the Army had and had to get rid of because they get old and sick and you can't really use them for military transport anymore, to give also an Army donkey or mule to each of these families that would have this 40 acres of land. So the claim is that here we had this promise of 40 acres and a mule, that was supposedly promised by Sherman towards the end of the war, as he was marching through Georgia at the end of the war, before the Confederacy formally surrendered, of promising each of them 40 acres and a mule. But then the US Congress abolished this this order of Sherman after the war was over. It said, in the end, the orders had little concrete effect because President Andrew Johnson issued a proclamation to return the lands to Southern owners who took a loyalty oath. So Johnson, who was the president at the time, after Lincoln was assassinated, right, in 1865, he defended the Union, but he was a Southerner, and he didn't have a high opinion of Black people. And he was such an obstacle to try to bring about radical change in the South that the US Congress impeached him. They found a reason having to do with how he treated the Secretary of War, and they impeached him. And they put him on trial, and he was not found guilty because it required 2/3 majority of the Senate to vote to convict him as guilty and remove him from office as president. But the US Senate fell one vote short of the 2/3 majority of senators voting to find him guilty and remove Johnson from the presidency. So he knew he couldn't run for re-election in 1868 because he was hated. Again, Lincoln is dead. What would Lincoln have done? Would Lincoln have insisted that that order be implemented? I don't know. We don't know. Lincoln was murdered at the end of the war, and so he goes on to history as this great, mythological Christ-like figure. What he would have done in terms of Reconstruction, because this period of the U.S. history after the end of the war until 1877 is officially called Reconstruction. And Reconstruction is the term used for trying to reconstruct the United States, the Union of States. And so if I type in Reconstruction here, you can see, of course, the label Reconstruction area, to reconstruct the United States. And that included, for example, adopting the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment that promised everybody equality under the law, right? And the 15th Amendment that promised everybody that you could not remove people's rights as citizens on the basis of their race, background, or previous enslaved condition. This may be the most important amendment to the U.S. Constitution ever, because this has been used, the 14th Amendment, as one of the three so-called Civil War amendments. The 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, the 14th Amendment guaranteeing equality under the law, and the 15th Amendment reducing the civil rights of people, or reinstating, what does it say here? Abridging a citizen's right to vote. These are all part of Reconstruction of the United States. And of course, to rejoin the United States, the southern states, they weren't allowed to leave the United States, but to re-enter Congress with 2 senators and congressional representatives, each of the southern states that had rebelled, they had to agree to ratify in their own in their own state governments, they each had to ratify the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments to rejoin the Union with all of the rights, including having representation in Congress with 2 senators and members of the House of Representatives. So that was part of this Reconstruction. And until 1877, Northern troops continued to stay in the southern states that they had conquered in the war, that they had reconquered in the war. So, from 1865 to 1877, Black people actually are able to exercise their rights. They elect Black politicians. They elect a Black governor. I think of Mississippi, a Black senator is elected. And also the Ku Klux Klan emerges, as I mentioned, that would reemerge in a new form in the 1920s. The Ku Klux Klan is a terrorist organization that emerges among white Southerners to use violence, including lynching, the killing of people and extrajudicial killings to terrorize Black people. Despite the laws, but despite the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment, eventually the North withdraws its troops in a political deal following the 1876 election. That's very controversial, and it was decided in the U.S. Congress who won that election. And an Ohio governor, Harrison, was chosen over Tilden from New York. And the deal for the Congress to approve Harrison was that Harrison promised that he would withdraw the soldiers, the occupying soldiers from the South, if he was made president. So he was made president, and the U.S. Army soldiers from the North were removed from the South. And very quickly, the Southern forces, the white forces in the South, the white political forces, then began to move to gut or basically empty the meaning of these three amendments that were adopted to the U.S. Constitution. So Black people would not be formally slaves, but basically they would be marginalized through economic and violent coercion, right? So as I mentioned, these Black people own nothing. Johnson then returned the land that was given to many of these slaves, some of the slaves, informally enslaved people, to give them money, give them land and a mule to work as farmers and grow crops and sell those crops and maybe become part of the emerging middle class. But that was abolished by Johnson, and then when these soldiers are withdrawn, the white conservative forces then mobilized to basically enforce marginalization against Black people. So again, these Black people, they have nothing. They don't have land. They can't read and write. They can't. How are they going to survive? So they're going to keep farming, and so they take loans from their former their former enslavers. They go deeply into debt. They become sharecroppers. They become serfs, basically. They're no longer slaves. They're more like serfs, like in medieval times in Europe or in Asia, where the village or the farmer would give up a third of his crop to the landowner as a payment, because they would go hopelessly into debt. They could never get out of debt, and so they had to rely upon the loans of the landowner to be able to do any farming in order to survive. So basically, they were no longer slaves; they're more like serfs. And if they attempted to use their rights to vote in elections, for example, they would be prevented from doing that by various forms that we call Jim Crow laws, right? For example, requiring that anybody who wanted to vote had to pass a literacy test, because how can you practice the right to vote if you're not able to read the newspaper and keep up with current events and be informed as a voter? If you can't read and write, well, then you maybe shouldn't be allowed to vote, because if you can't read or write, someone's probably paying you to vote in a way. They promised you a glass of a big gallon of a big jug of mekju if you vote in a certain way, because you can't read or write, so what do you know? And so we're going to protect democracy by having a literacy test. Keeping in mind, of course, these formerly enslaved people, they couldn't read and write, they were illiterate. Or we need some money to run the election. So if you want to vote, you have to pay a poll tax. You have to pay some money to vote in the election, because we need to have money to run the elections, and the people that want to participate in elections, we'll let them pay a little money, to participate in elections, because they care about democracy. Well, how much do you care? Well, put a little money into it to show that you really care and are paying attention to current events, and you really are concerned about that. And of course, if you have to pay some money, you're not likely being bribed by somebody to vote in a certain way. I mean, I heard these kinds of things when I was in Bulgaria, that with a new democracy in Bulgaria, that a lot of poor people were were being bribed to vote in certain ways, and they would take the claim is that they would take their cell phones into the voting booth and vote in Bulgarian and take a picture of their vote and then show it to somebody, and then somebody would give them a little money or something for voting the right way. And that same kind of justifications that were used, on the surface, they sound kind of reasonable. You should be able to read and write if you're going to be able to vote and participate in democracy. You should pay a little money to support. But it was all basically meant to keep Black people from voting. And if the Black people insisted upon voting, then you could terrorize them, right? Somebody show up and kill somebody at night for supposedly doing something that irritated some local, particularly white people. And I told you, thousands of people died that way. The lynching memorial, the lynching museum opened up just several years ago in the United States. Let's see if I can find it here. Lynching museum. This is the National Memorial for Lynching for Peace and Justice that opened just several years ago in the United States to the victims of in Alabama, to the victims of lynching. And so here you can see some statues that were placed there for enslaved people. So this just opened not too long ago, in 2018. Yes, so 5 years ago. But back to the other one that I was showing you there. So this is all part of Reconstruction, and then the U.S. government. It's hard for me to understand what happened. But basically, the U.S. government got tired of trying to make these white people not abuse their Black people. They knew this was going on. It wasn't a secret, right? It wasn't a big secret. This kind of abuse was happening, and it was escalating. That lynching was going on. It was known. People were reporting it. But, for most white people, even if white people did not believe in slavery, it didn't necessarily believe that Black people were equal to white people. So if there's going to have if there's going to be this caste system, de facto caste system in the South, well, that's just the way they do things in the South. They can come up with ways to rationalize not addressing this issue. That begins to change significantly after World War I. Okay, so because in World War I, millions of Americans are mobilized to fight in this war. 5 million American soldiers are mobilized when the U.S. had much smaller population, including lots of Black soldiers are mobilized. They're given military training. They're given guns, right? They go to Europe. They fight in Europe. They see a different world, right? They can see that world is not the one way. That the world can change. The world is different. And they were fighting supposedly for freedom and democracy. And so they come back. And of course, a lot of Black people then move to the North to work in the factories that the white people leave to go fight and join the army. So there's also this big movement of Black people from the South, and the so-called Great Migration that happens at this time for Black people migrating to the North from the South to go work in the factories in what does it say? African American migration. Here it is, right? The Great Migration from 1910 to and 1970 of Black people to work up in the North and out in California in the big cities there. And you can see references to Jim Crow laws, lynching in the United States, Jim Crow laws. I think you can see this, right? Make sure you can see this, because I'm not so certain if the screen share is actually showing the right screen. I've got to do that frequently to make sure that it actually is working. So there you can see the Great Migration. You can see the reference to lynching in the US, Jim Crow laws, Jim Crow economy, and so on. And okay, so So back to this statement here. So, well, let's go to the exercise. So how are we going to reconstruct the United States? How are we going to reconstruct the United States? So we go back to the cyber campus. And so we have material here. Make sure you can see the screen, share screen. And go here and share screen. Okay, so you can see it, material. And so let's see who's attending today. So we go here to radical Republicans, freedmen, defeated Southern leaders, and moderate Republicans. So we'll just count off by 4. So there's 4 groups. So the ones will be the radical Republicans, the freedmen will be, the 2s will be the freedmen groups. How about we go A, B, C, D? So no, let's go 1, 2, 3, 4 because it's it's easier that way. So group 1 is radical Republicans, group 2 are freedmen, group 3 are defeated Southern leaders, and group 4 are moderate Republicans. So we go here to the Zoom, and no, that's not what I want to do. Cancel that, stop share. Go back to here and go here. And we go to participants. And so we have here. And so, so you can see my screen, right? And you share screen, share screen. So you can see here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, so who is this? 202-329-207. You're a 1. Abby G, you're a 2. Khalees Benola, you're a 3. Emma, you're a 4. Eugenia, you're a 1. Jaeun Park, you're a 2. Park Ji-Yu, you're a 3. Rachel Chernow, you're a 4. And Sunu Park, you're a 1. Okay, got it? No, I'll tell you this. Let's do it like this. It's easier like this. Okay, I apologize. I'm trying to remember how to do this this stuff with all of these capabilities. So let's assign you to breakout rooms. That's it. I'll assign you to breakout rooms. So 4 breakout rooms. So group 1 is the first group. Group 2 is the second group, and so on. So assign automatically. And so we create the 4 groups here. And there you can see the 4 groups. So please join these rooms. So room 1, and I think again, make sure you're able to see this. Room 1, you are, again, make sure you're able to see this. So you can see this. This is room 1. Khalees, Rachel, and Pak. Room 2 is Emma and Pak Jiul. Room 3 is Abby and Jaeyoon. And room 4 is 202-329-207, whoever that is, and Eugenia. And room 1 is, again, to go through the list here, is, if I can show the screen, and here, share screen. And so you can see, here's the screen, the material. And again, room 1 is radical Republicans, room 2 is freedmen, room 3 is defeated Southern leaders, and room 4 is moderate Republicans. Okay? So download these files, and the files are the same for everybody, but in terms of the question they ask, so you open this up here, and you can see the file, and it says this is, for example, radical Republicans. How will you treat the leaders of the old Confederate government? Some of them would like to run for office and rejoin your government. What rules do you make for states that want to rejoin the Union? 3, how do people get back their citizenship in the Union? Because traitors were, these people fought a war against the federal government. Should they be allowed to get back their citizenship in the Union? Who will guarantee the rights of free blacks? How will you educate the blacks and teach them job skills? How can they farm if they don't own land? I guess let's focus on, because we're running out of time here, the first 4 questions. Everybody focus on the first 4 questions. Okay, on the first 4 questions. So again, room 1, you are Group one, which is again the radical Republicans. Room two, you're the freedmen, the former slaves. Room three, you're the defeated plantation owners, the Confederate Army officers, the people that led the rebellion. And four, you're the moderate Republicans, right? Who just want to get back to making money. So let me open up the rooms here and break out rooms here. And so open all the rooms. So join those rooms, please. Join the rooms. Khalees, Rachel, Pak, room one. Emma, Pak Jiu, room two. Abby, Jalen, Pak, room three. And 202-329-207. And again, you join room four. Evgenia, where are you, Evgenia? Pak Jiu, join room two. Evgenia. Well, so somebody's going to speak for each group. So let me ask Siri. I will choose one person from room one to speak for room one. And so let me ask Siri. Siri, pick a number between 1 and 3.
It's 3.
So Siri picked 3. So Pak Sun-woo, that's you. You're going to be the one that speaks for room one. Okay. For room two, who's going to speak for room two? Emma's a 1, Pak Jiu's a 2. Siri, pick a number between 1 and 2.
It's 2.
So that's Pak Jiu. He'll speak for room 2. Siri, pick a number. Oh, sorry. Siri, pick a number between 1 and 2.
I found this on the web.
No. Siri, pick a number between 1 and 2.
The answer is 2.
Okay, so that's Jaehoon Park for room 3. And since 202-329-207, that's all by themselves, 202-329-207 will speak for room 4. Okay. So talk to each other and help the speaker prepare to your answers to those first 4 questions. Okay. Did you hear what I was saying? Oh, did you hear what I was saying earlier? I hope so. Can you hear me? Hello? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you call us, Professor?
Oh, did I make a mistake here? Okay. Yeah, Zoom has updated its software, so they have this function that they didn't have last time I checked, where I can talk to you. I have to actually choose to talk to you in each of the rooms. So now I'm talking to each of the rooms. So I asked Siri who's going to speak for each of the rooms. So Mr. Pak, Sun-woo Park is going to speak in room 1. Pak Jiu will speak for room 2. Jaehoon Park will speak for room 3, and 202-329-207 will speak for room 4, right? And again, room 1 is the radical Republicans. Room 2 is the freedmen. Room 3 is the defeated Southern landowners, and room 4 is the moderate Republicans. And so concentrating on addressing each of those first 4 questions. This is a nice thing, but this wasn't available on Zoom in May. last time I used I don't know the last time I used the breakout rooms. Maybe this is the first time I used the breakout rooms in a couple years. But they have this function where you can broadcast voice to all of the rooms. You couldn't do that previously. Previously, when you assign people to rooms, you couldn't talk to them. You could only send them messages. But now you can do it with voice, which is, I guess, a good thing. But I didn't know that when I was talking to you. So I'm able to talk to all the rooms now. Okay. So answer those first 4 questions on each of those exercise papers that you can download from the materials class materials site. Okay. Zero 2329. Hello, 2023292007. Who are you?
I'm Shining.
Oh, okay. So you are a moderate Republican. So let's look at moderate Republican sheet here. Okay. And so we click here and open this up. And then I go to Zoom and then I share the screen. And it says here, moderate Republican. And so you have saved the Union at all costs. They included defeating the Confederacy and freeing the slaves. Hard will you be with the defeated South. You feel strongly that if you push them too far, they will only rebel again. What kind of society will you set up now? Do you let the tall groups have complete social and political freedom, or is freedom from slavery enough? I think that you let all groups, you don't need a T there, it's a mistake. Some groups resent your use of the president's power to make these sweeping changes. They missed the times before the war when Congress made most of the decisions. Others think that you are not acting quickly or strongly enough to deal with the problems at the end of the war. They want to punish the South and give complete freedom to blacks immediately. How will you keep a balance that will keep everyone happy and keep your party in power? Here are the problems you must discuss and solve. So, how are you going to treat the old Confederate government? You want to execute them, arrest them, and kill them?
I think no.
No. So, okay, more, and this has come up again because that 14th Amendment states that anyone who has rebelled against the authority of the U.S. federal government, the Constitution of the U.S. government, that they are barred from holding elected office. And that's been used as an argument to keep Donald Trump off of the presidential ballot next year, because he supposedly led that riot, insurrection uprising on January 6, 2021. So that argument is circulating in the media today that under the 14th Amendment, number 14, right? Number 14, that Donald Trump tried to organize an overthrow of the U.S. government. He tried to stop the Joe Biden from becoming president by organizing a riot, an insurrection. So he should be barred. People are actually saying that. So reminding us what is in the 14th Amendment. That's one of the elements in the 14th Amendment. So do you think leaders of the old Confederate government should be allowed to run for office and rejoin the government? Of course, you know what did happen, what eventually did happen in reality. But of course, what do you think? Should they be allowed back in?
No, I think they.
Well, I think they what they ended up having to do is they had to take swear another oath, and then the U.S. Congress passed a law giving amnesty to the rebels. So the US Congress actually passed a law granting amnesty to those people. So yeah, even though they rebelled, they could then pursue elected office. I don't think that they were prevented from becoming politicians after this. I know one Southern general became a general in the US Army, and he fought in the Spanish-American War against Spain when the United States conquered Puerto Rico and Cuba and Guam and the Philippines in 1898 against Spain. He was a Confederate general, and then he was a general in the US Army in that war. So what rules do you make for the states that want to rejoin the Union?
What rule? Is the premise of rejoining the Union or after joining the Union?
They were not allowed to leave. Your question is a good one because it's kind of confusing, because it highlights that in order to have representation back in the US Congress, they had to do certain things. And I told you what was eventually decided is that they had to ratify, each state had to ratify the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And that was enough to allow them to send 2 senators and members of the House of Representatives back to the US Congress. I think they just had to swear again, an oath to the United States to serve as, had a former Confederate general become an Army general. That seems like that they're allowed to do pretty much anything if they're allowed to become generals in the US Army.
Yes.
And how you guarantee the rights of free blacks, right? So basically, this is what was adopted. This is what was decided, basically. This was what the default position that the American government defaulted to, basically just, giving up after 1877, even though horrible things were happening in the South and it wasn't a secret. But then, you have the war with Spain, but then World War I happens, and then the Great Depression happens, and then World War II happens. And so there was a movement by Black people. I guess I should go back to, talk to everybody. So let me go back here and leave the room. There was, because I think I should talk to everybody. So, okay. Okay, so now we will leave the rooms, and since we're of course running out of time, hear what you have to say. And so I'm now going to ask you to leave the rooms here. Two 202329 you can leave room 4. Okay. Okay, so who's going to speak first? So let me ask Siri. Siri, pick a number between 1 and 4.
It's 1.
Okay, so that is Mr. Park Sun-woo. You're a radical Republican. So, Mr. Radical Republican, let's go back to the Radical Republican worksheet here, material. and you are a radical Republican. Hooray, radical Republicans. Hooray. Click here. And so how will you treat the leaders of the, make sure you can see this. So make sure you share the screen. How will you treat the leaders of the old government?
Okay, so because we are radical Republican, we will make strong demands. All of the people who joined the old Confederate government will go to court, and they will face justice.
You know, it's actually interesting because this has all come up again in the U.S. since the U.S. is now dealing with the Trump phenomenon. You know, and you know, some people are saying this upcoming election in the United States is going to be as important for the United States as the election of 1860 was. There's not going to be a civil war. Nobody's going to try to. No state's going to leave the United States. But if Donald Trump gets reelected, he's going to pardon himself for all the crimes he committed, and it's going to radically change the United States. And right now, he's at least equal with Biden in the polls. So the New York Times, somebody wrote yesterday, this is the most important election in the United States since 1860. Remember we did the exercise in the election of 1860? And that brings to mind what was going on in 1860 in the American Civil War. So if you go to the 14th Amendment here, and so let me call up the U.S. Constitution, 14th Amendment. And let me see what Wikipedia has to say here. This was one of the 3 amendments that were adopted, the so-called Civil War amendments that were adopted. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment was adopted during the Civil War. And so this was adopted as one of the Reconstruction Amendments, usually considered one of the most consequential amendments. This has been referenced today as well because it says that, and you can see the reference to the radical Republicans who advanced the 13th and 14th Amendments, that they advocated, rebellion. The second, third, and fourth sections of the amendment are seldom litigated. However, the second section's reference to rebellion or other crime is invoked as a constitutional ground for felony disenfranchisement. The fourth section was held to prohibit, it says here, what does it say? If you look at this has been referenced now because it says that somebody who has rebelled and broke his oath to the U.S. Constitution may not hold elected office again. Yeah, it says here, Section 3, disqualification from office for insurrection or rebellion. So some people are arguing that Donald Trump should not be allowed to run for president because he oversaw that January 6, 2001 riot insurrection at the U.S. Congress to try to stop Joe Biden from being certified president of the United States. So this is, nobody really talked about this in recent years until now, right? That this has come up that says Donald Trump should not be allowed to be a candidate for president because of the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Now, of course, this was originally targeted against the people that were participated in the Confederate Army. But Section 5 gives Congress enforcement power. It was after the amendment's adoption in 1868, disqualification was seldom enforced in the South. In 1872, under Ulysses S. Grant, the victorious general who then beat the South and then became president, the U.S. Congress in 1872 passed the Amnesty Act, which removed the disqualification from all but the most senior Confederates. So, and then in 1898, as a gesture of national unity during the Spanish-American War, Congress passed another law broadening the amnesty. And so, but it says here, before Reconstruction in 2021, Section 3 was invoked only once. It was used to block Socialist Party of America member Victor L. Berger of Wisconsin, convicted of violating the Espionage Act adopted in 1917 during World War I for opposing U.S. entry into World War I from assuming his seat in the House of Representatives in 1919 and 1920. So it's now being used after the January 6, 2021 argument. And so people are attempting to sue Trump or try to use the legal system to keep Trump off the ballot in the election coming up in November next year. Trump disqualification debate. Okay, so this is this is significant. I mean, it's just brought up the 14th Amendment and this, but of course, we're running out of time. So let's go now to group two. Group two. And who is group two? Group two is, and that is Pak Jiul speaking for, let's see here. Pak Jiul speaking for the freedmen. So for freedmen, Pak Jiul, freedmen. And we go here to freedmen, click on freedmen, open up that file. So how do you recommend that the rights of blacks be guaranteed, of free blacks be guaranteed?
So, Professor, we already the answer for about the southern. We prepared the southern leaders about southern leaders.
Okay,
And
so how do you propose to guarantee the rights of free blacks?
Sorry?
How will you guarantee the rights of free blacks? Can you see that screen?
No.
Let's see here. I guess maybe I go down here to material. Southern leaders. So Southern leaders. Defeated Southern leaders. So what is your response then as defeated Southern leaders?
Okay. We don't think we can trust them because we've already experienced negative things with those leaders, and also we don't think we can make a better world with them. This is our answer.
But you're one of the defeated Southern leaders. Do you think you should be allowed back into American politics?
No.
You don't want to be back in the American politics? You don't want to be back in U.S. Congress? You're a defeated Southern leader.
We want to, but we
So you're going to emigrate? A lot of defeated black Southern leaders, they moved to Brazil. They moved to, I mean, they left. Some left the United States. There's a American community in Brazil consisting of Confederate people that rebelled and were defeated, and then they moved to Brazil. I think some went to Mexico. So you're going to leave the U.S. I don't know where you're going to find. I mean, the Brazilians didn't end slavery until the 1880s, I think. Brazil didn't end slavery until like sometime in the 1880s. So maybe you could still dream about, living in a slave society if you go live in Brazil and speak Portuguese.
We're so ashamed that we lost, that we cannot stay longer in the US because we think that it's a depraved land, so we cannot stay standing there.
No. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Maybe you could go to South Africa, right? Because of course they didn't really have slavery, but they had apartheid, right? Well, South Africa didn't implement apartheid until 1948. That's when the Afrikaner parties came into power. And in 1948, they began to implement their policy of apartheid. So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't enslavement, but it was like legal segregation and marginalization. But then that would end in what, 1994, I think, finally. Yeah, it's sad. Yeah, your way of life.
Yeah, we're just too proud, so we we're just too proud, so we can't bear the fact that we've lost. Just our ego was wounded by that. So yeah, we just can't accept our fate, so we have to.
What you could do is you could form the Ku Klux Klan and terrorize Black people and have fun engaging in brutal, sadistic killing and mutilation of Black people as a way by which to institute a way of giving meaning to your existence by terrorizing and mocking and terrorizing Black people. And I'm not exaggerating. Right? Yeah. It was almost like a sport. You saw those lynching videos, right? Of people celebrating when they're going to lynch and kill a Black person, and pictures, and they would have a party, It's like, this is what we do in the South. This is our way of life. Wow. Supposedly the German Nazis learned a lot from the American segregationists in their own policies, right? But that's another topic. Friedman, who's the Friedman? Abby, Jaeun Pak, Abby, Jaeun Pak, are you a Friedman?
Professor, actually, I think there's some confusion over here because when we were first assigned group 3, we were supposed to be the defeated leaders.
Okay, so what is your view about what should happen to the defeated leaders?
For all 4 questions or
anyone, pick one. We're out of time.
Pick one? Okay. So what we came up with, what rules do we make for states that want to rejoin the union? Well, as we are defeated, like I think we don't really get a choice, but we once had a system that we had slaves who had brought our money, right? So instead, if we have to rejoin the union, then okay, then we will, but we will use paid employees to still work for us. Well, because like back then they didn't have the term called minimum wage. So yeah, we'll use the paid employees.
Okay, and become business people and maybe move away from farming. But again, the southern part of the United States, the old Confederacy, that's still the poorest part of the United States. It had been the richest before the American Civil War. One of the richest areas because slaves were valuable property, but then it would not recover from the economic shock of freeing the enslaved people until the 1920s. They wouldn't recover economically to the per person income that they had relative to the rest of the country. Not even, it's still the poorest part of America, like Mississippi, those areas. So they've never really, the shock of slavery was amazing. And so Xi Jinping 202392927, you're the freedmen. What's your last word? How will we guarantee the rights of free blacks? Oh no, you're a moderate Republican. Sorry, you're a moderate Republican. Sorry. 20239. You have the last. What's your last word?
My last word. I didn't catch that.
So, how will states rejoin the union?
Can I answer the question 4?
Yes.
So maybe I will, because I have to balance the citizens and myself, like my rights, right? So I would, in order to make the free blacks feel safe and don't against the laws again, I would like give them some land to work.
Yeah, I guess, but you didn't. I think the Congress also agreed not to do it also. So yeah, I think I guess this notion of property, right? That taking people's land away, you can understand the argument. You're taking away their enslaved property, their enslaved people, which had been part of America for 250 years. Now you're going to take their land away as well. America is all about life, liberty, and the ownership of property, right? And now we're going to take away their land after taking away their enslaved labor. That's too much for a moderate Republican. But we'll have to take this up later because we're out of time. But I'm sorry we went over time here. It's just that, we're trying to cover so much in so little time. And, but we'll have next class also to have a debate on these topics. So, and talk more about it. So that's all for today. Anybody else? Any questions? If not, that's all. Bye.